If you talk all the time, you'll never hear what anybody else has to say. And therefore, all you'll have to talk about is your own conversation. The same is true for people who think all the time. That means, when I use the word think, talking to yourself, subvocal conversation, the constant chit-chat of symbols and images and talk and words inside your skull. Now, if you do that all the time, you'll find that you've nothing to think about except thinking. And just as you have to stop talking to hear what others have to say, you have to stop thinking to find out what life is about. And the moment you stop thinking, you become into immediate contact with the unspeakable world. The force of liberation will blow the world to pieces.
Testing, testing. Hello, everybody, and welcome to SpaceWeek Live for this Sunday, March 13th, 2022. Sorry for that technical issue there. So it was a pretty quiet week in space, a little more activity here on the ground, but let's take a look at what is going on in the world of spaceflight. So there was a video that actually started circulating on the 5th, which was a little more than a week ago, released by Russian state-owned news agency RIA Novosti, which, if I can switch my view here, which shows Russian cosmonauts saying goodbye to astronaut Mark Vande Hei and closing the hatch on the Russian segment of the space station and literally disconnecting the Russian segment from the American segment and splitting the space station in half. Now, there's some conflicting accounts as to the origin of this video, whether it was produced by Roscosmos or whether it was just some media propaganda or whatnot. But nonetheless, it's, despite the sort of cheesy animation nature of the video there, the message that it sends is pretty chilling, considering that this is an official state news agency that released this. And the implication is that they are advocating for the breakup of the space station, the separation of the Russian half, and the abandoning of astronaut Mark Vande Hei, who is scheduled to return on Soyuz MS-19 on the 30th of this month. So would Russia actually split up the space station and abandon or maroon Mark Vande Hei on the station? I would say that the chances of that happening are very far-fetched. But you never know. I mean, Rogozin, Dmitry Rogozin, the head of Roscosmos, has been very vocal about his displeasure at the international sanctions that have been, aimed at Russia since their invasion of Ukraine a few weeks ago. And trying to find a good freeze frame here, there. And but does that sort of vitriol and rhetoric translate into action? Well, in a manner of speaking, yes, because Russia has cut off their supply of engines to U.S. rocket makers, ULA and Northrop Grumman. But ULA already had a large stockpile of RD-180 engines for their Atlas V rockets, enough for 24 launches. Northrop Grumman, it's not as clear how many they have on hand, but nonetheless, the Russian spigot has stopped flowing, as it were. They did also, as we discussed last week, cover up the flags. They basically put the kibosh on future OneWeb launches, which is not a U.S. endeavor, but a British company whose majority stakeholder is currently an Indian investment firm. But Russia did put a hold on OneWeb launches. They physically covered up the flags of all of the contributing nations except for India. And all of those contributing nations except for India had voted to condemn Russia's attack on the Ukraine. So a lot of politics going on, but would they actually split up the space station? Well, firstly, can they actually split up the space station? So the last time I saw a tour of the space station, a fly-through tour of the space station, there were a whole bunch of cables and hoses and whatnot draped through the portal in between the American segment and the Russian segment. So if the Russians were to be tasked with disconnecting the Russian segment from the American segment, they would have to disconnect all of those hoses and connections. Additionally, there are connections on the outside, running on the outside of the space station that would have to be undone. You can't just close the door and leave. I mean, yes, maybe with a visiting spacecraft you can, but not with the space station's modules themselves. Furthermore, the Zvezda, the first, I believe it was the first Russian module on the space station, is actually owned by the U.S. We bought it from them. So if they were to steal that, that would mark basically the theft of many millions of dollars worth of space hardware. Furthermore, if the Russians detached the American segment from the Russian segment, they would lose the majority of their power, if not all of their power, because the truss structure on which is mounted all of the ISS's solar arrays, both old and new, is not attached to the Russian, is not mounted to the Russian segment. It's on the American side. And so if the Russians detached the Russian half of the ISS, they'd basically be dooming themselves. And so I think that the video that circulated, while disturbing, is pure propaganda and not realistic. Now, regarding Mark Vande Hei, would the Russians refuse to allow Mark Vande Hei to return on Soyuz MS-19 this March 30th, when he's scheduled to return to a touchdown in Kazakhstan? While I wouldn't put it past Rogozin to shoot himself in the foot yet again, I think the chances that they would not allow Vande Hei to return are also very slim. There would be no reason for them to do that other than because it would essentially be further severing their sort of how do I put this? Sullying their already not so sterling name as a provider of space launch services. If they can't even be relied upon to honor their agreement to return astronauts to the Earth when their tour is up. Now, if they did abandon Mark Vande Hei on the space station, what would we do? Well, presumably what would happen, because from the time of the retirement of the space shuttle in 2011 to the time of the first Demo 2 launch of Crew Dragon in, 2019, Russian Soyuz was the only way to get to the space station. And so they were the only game in town, and they charged us a premium accordingly. But with Crew Dragon and eventually Starliner, if they ever get the launches going on that one, get the kinks worked out, we have backup options. And this is why it's important to diversify. And this is one of the reasons why, even though Starliner is much more expensive than Crew Dragon, NASA is insisting that they want more than one option, not just SpaceX, because who knows, something could happen to SpaceX. They could fall on hard times, go out of business, or it doesn't seem likely, but you never know what, their factory could be attacked. I mean, who knows? It's important, especially in the interest of national defense and the national interest in general, to have multiple options for these things. And so if Mark Vande Hei were stranded on the station, likely what would happen is that an additional seat would be put on the next Crew Dragon to launch in, when is it supposed to go up? Later this month, or in April or May, sometime the next couple of months, there's another Crew Dragon scheduled to go up. So another seat could be sent up on that Crew Dragon. So Crew Dragon is designed to accommodate up to 7 crew. There is room for 7 seats on Crew Dragon, but in the NASA configuration, there have been only 4 seats. But if they added a 5th seat, they would have to shift some cargo around, maybe reduce the payload a bit, but there is room for it, and Vande Hei could come down on that. And it's also been discussed whether he would have a SpaceX space suit, because those are custom fitted for each astronaut. But the answer would be that they have generic suits that are available that might not be a perfect fit for Vande Hei, but they could send that up again on the next Crew Dragon. So Mark Vande Hei will be okay, and 90% probability that he'll return on March 30th as scheduled. And there's also been some concern expressed as to Mark's safety if he were to return to Russian hands, as it were, in Kazakhstan. And my response to that is there is no chance that Roscosmos would do anything to Mark Vande Hei, beat him up or kidnap him or anything like that. That would be an act of war, and Russia absolutely doesn't want to open that can of worms, because then they would have much bigger fish to fry than just Ukraine. So let's see. Astra also provided an update in other news this past week. Astra provided an update on their ongoing investigation of last month's launch anomaly, which resulted in the loss of LV0008. They said that it was due to an electrical issue. It turns out that the fairing's 5 separation mechanisms fired in the wrong order, which resulted in the last separation mechanism never receiving its command to open, which prevented the fairing from separating completely before the upper stage ignition, which we saw in the video. The fairing did not open, and then the second stage was released and then ignited, which blew out the fairing and caused the upper stage to tumble uncontrollably. Now, I also did see a claim from someone that they might have been able to stabilize the upper stage despite the violent tumbling that was happening, but I didn't see anything from Astra on that. Last week's only launch, you'll have to pardon me a moment, my secondary screen is keeps blanking out, and so I actually can't see what's on the screen. All right, here we go. Last week's only launch was on Wednesday. SpaceX launched the 10th batch of 48 next-generation Starlink internet satellites with laser interlinks. Let's check out the launch.
Mass 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine full power. And liftoff. Falcon 9, starting vortex.
Vehicles pitching that way.
So unfortunately, there was no live footage of the landing, but it did land successfully. The booster did. And there was also no footage of the Starlink satellite deployment, although they kept the audio stream up so that people could hear the confirmation of successful satellite deployment. But no issues, and SpaceX's outstanding record is still continuing. So that was the only launch last week. Now, looking further back at space history, this Friday the 18th marks the 57th anniversary of the first spacewalk by Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov. Interestingly, so in completely unrelated news, I started watching the Apple Plus or Apple TV Plus series For All Mankind a few days ago, and Alexei Leonov in that fictional alternate history series, which takes a look at what might have happened if the Russians were the first to land on the moon, and the space race, proceeded very differently than it actually did. They actually had Soviet cosmonaut Alexei Leonov landing on the moon in 1969, shortly ahead of the Apollo 11 launch. But yeah, interesting. So, looking ahead to this week, let's see. On Monday, March 14th at 11:22 a.m. Eastern, 15:22 UTC, there might be an Astra rocket launch from Kodiak Island, Alaska, with the S4 crossover mission. Now, multiple launch schedule websites list this launch, even though it's been less than a month since Astra experienced the launch failure and the loss of their customer's payload on February 10th. But there is actually a TFR in place, a temporary flight restriction, for Kodiak Island on the for the 13th through the 15th. So maybe there is actually a launch. Maybe they had a rapid turnover of this, a quick fix of this fairing separation mechanism timing issue. But so there might be an Astra launch tomorrow. Tuesday, March 15th, starting at 6:30 a.m. Eastern, 10:30 UTC, Astronauts Kayla Barron and Raja Chari will conduct a 6.5-hour spacewalk to prepare the station's 3A power channel for installation of the next pair of IROSAs. Those are the ISS rollout solar arrays. The first pair were delivered on SpaceX Dragon CRS-22 back in June 2021. The next pair will go up on a SpaceX Dragon CS-25 this coming May. Thursday, March 17th at 5 p.m. Eastern, 2100 UTC, is the rollout of the Artemis 1 Space Launch System rocket to Launch Complex 39B at Kennedy Space Center. So 39A is leased by SpaceX long-term, but 39B is the SLS launch pad. The launch of the unmanned Artemis 1 mission around the moon is scheduled for no earlier than May. And I had heard a couple of days ago that the crawler was on the move. The crawler is the huge relic from the 1960s that both the Saturn V and the space shuttle and now the SLS rocket will sit on top of as it's transported from the VAB to the launch pad. Friday, March 18th at 11:15 a.m. Eastern, 15:15 UTC, begins launch coverage of the Soyuz MS-21 crew to the ISS. For the first time ever, 3 Russian cosmonauts will ride the Soyuz to the ISS, with no U.S. or foreign crew members. While the timing of this Russian-only launch may seem a bit suspect, it's purely coincidental, as I mentioned last week. The crew was chosen back in May 2021. Rendezvous coverage begins at 2:15 p.m. Eastern, 18:15 UTC, and hatch opening coverage begins at 5:15 p.m. Eastern, 21:15 UTC. I may run it as one single long live stream with intermissions in between the live coverage segments, but in any case, I'll have coverage of all of these events here on the Raw Space channel. Now, these cosmonauts will stay on the station for about 6 months, returning on September 29th. A few hours later, at 9:30 p.m. Eastern on the 18th, 01:30 UTC on the 19th, SpaceX launches another batch of approximately 48 Starlink satellites from Cape Canaveral. And that is it for the coming week. So we have a few things going on this week. Last week was pretty light on activity, especially with all the uncertainty in Eastern Europe going on. Let me see. I'd like to take a moment to thank our continuing channel members and supporters for their ongoing support of the channel. It definitely helps move things along. And let me see what you have in the way of questions. All right. Ken and Lucas. First of all, if you have any questions and you haven't already, make sure to tag my name at Raw Space in the chat so we're sure to see it. Should have said that up front. All right, Ken and Lucas. Remember that at the height of the Cold War, the Apollo-Soyuz project was carried out. Yep, that's very true. So cooperation can be achieved even in darker times than we have now. But Not Applicable says, I still think that SpaceX is on it already. Probably next Dragon going up will have an extra seat on board. Remember, Dragon 2 was initially intended for a total of 7 crew. Yeah. So that's probable that there will be an extra seat on the next Crew Dragon if Mark Vande Hei can't return on the Soyuz, which I feel is a very slim chance of that. Rockin' Robin's 13, more likely the Russians will evacuate the ISS. So in the event that Roscosmos and Russia wanted to completely sever all ties with the West, I agree that it is more likely that rather than, because like the American side, the Russian side, the majority of the Russian side of the ISS is in fact more than 20 years old. It is an aging station, and it's currently only slated to fly through through 2031, at which point it would be, deorbited over the Pacific. But if Russia wanted to completely sever their ties with the West, then it does seem more likely that the cosmonauts would simply abandon the space station, and rather than sabotaging it or cutting it in half or whatever. Now, they did just deliver, a few months ago, they did just deliver the multi-purpose science module. Shoot, what's the name of that thing? Anyway, the new science module on the Russian side. Now, granted, it was delayed by like 14 years. It was supposed to launch a long time ago, but they did just deliver it to the station last year. And so it seems unlikely that the Russians would abandon their brand new science module that they're still in the process of preparing for use. There are still occasional Russian spacewalks to finish outfitting and prepping the new science module. Nauka is the name of it, for operations. But again, who knows? There's a lot of political uncertainty, and Roscosmos's chief doesn't seem shy about burning bridges at this point. So time will tell what they actually end up doing. Tig says, so with the Russians out, who brings the ISS supplies now? Dragon? So I don't think the Russians have actually stated that they will no longer supply the ISS. They have, Rogozin threatened to do so, but what they have stated that they will stop doing is providing engines to the U.S. and but they've made a lot of threats, but most of them are likely empty threats. But yes, we have the Dragon, Cargo Dragon, which can continue to supply the ISS. We have the Japanese HTV, the H2 transfer vehicle, which, while they were supposed to have been done with that, it is possible they could make more. They have the new generation of HTV, whatever it's called, the H3 transfer vehicle that is, I guess, not yet ready. I'm not sure when the first launch of that was supposed to be, but old equipment can still be remanufactured in most cases. There's also Cygnus, but there's the question of, does Northrop Grumman have enough RD-181 engines, which are Russian, for their Centaur upper stage? I'm sorry, for their Antares rocket. My bad. Which is what what that cargo craft launches on. Now, there's a lot up in the air with the loss of the supply of Russian engines. ULA, like I said, is pretty good to go. They have 24 more missions that they can launch with the existing stock of RD-180 engines. But Northrop Grumman, not so sure. Now, the Cygnus module can be launched on an Atlas V, but with the cutoff of additional RD-180 engines, I suspect that the schedule of Atlas V launches is basically set in stone, and they wouldn't accept, additional, like, in other words, if they were to take Cygnus and attach it to and mounted on top of an Atlas V, then that would be bumping some other Atlas V launch, which is on the schedule, which I'm sure is mapped out through the end of that vehicle's lifetime. I don't think that Tory Bruno has stated explicitly. He's very responsive, but he's also very brief in his replies. So he doesn't flesh out a lot of the details that we might be curious about. But definitely thanks to him for being responsive in any case. All right, Canon Lucas, the problem is how Mark will get out of Russia after he has landed. So there is not a hot war between the United States or between NATO or between any European country other than Ukraine and Russia right now. The hot war is between Russia and the Ukraine. There are a lot of tensions, but even in the midst of an active war, VIPs can still be transferred between the countries, like an ambassador or an astronaut. Be, I think they would receive treatment just like an ambassador would be. That is, our countries are at loggerheads right now, but you go home and get out of our face, whatever. So not applicable in response to the cargo deliveries, maybe Electron in the future or new HTV from Japan. I don't think Electron is on the table. They don't have any, I don't even think the Electron rocket is big enough to accommodate a standard berthing adapter or a docking mechanism for the ISS. But HTV is a definite possibility, and that's the HTV is a large craft, so it can carry plenty of cargo if need be. Roggen Robbins 13, should we start a campaign to rename Falcon 9 to the American Broomstick? The broomstick thing, this was, of course, in response to a quote from Rogozin that without the Russian engines, maybe the Americans could fly on their broomsticks instead. And then Elon Musk replied that his broomstick is ready to go, and then I made the image of the Elon on a broomstick. I think that the usefulness of propagating that, of continuing to propagate that meme, is limited, because it kind of, I don't know, I guess it's a dig at Rogozin, but I don't know. I'm not big on continuing to poke after the point has been made. Rockin' Robbins 13, a huge relic to move another relic from the 1970s, the SLS. Yes, the SLS is cobbled together from basically an extension of, and sometimes a literal reuse of very old space shuttle parts. But that's how they're doing it. So, Stephen Roll, if Russia did put the effort to completely disconnect their modules and disconnect from the ISS, in theory, what would happen? Well, the ISS would still have power. I think there are systems on the Russian side that are still used by the American side, filters and whatnot. I don't have a definitive listing of where different systems on the ISS have cross usage or where there's redundancy, et cetera, But I think ultimately, if they did disconnect the Russian side, the ISS would survive. They have their solar arrays. They don't, they wouldn't have whatever services are being provided by the Russian side. But I think the ISS would survive. The Russian side, I'm not so sure, because I don't think they're prepared to power, for one thing, half of the space station with no solar arrays. So they would have a problem there. I think that if they did that, they would basically just be ditching it to deorbit, which again, I think the chances that they would do that are virtually nil. Okay, JD asks what shirt I'm wearing. This is my space steak, my raw space steak shirt, which is in the in Walmart, the raw space merch store. And boop. So yeah, I kind of cycle between my shirts, and today I'm wearing the steak. All right. Rockin' Robbins 13 says the advantages to SpaceX. If not for SpaceX, we might be in a very difficult position right now because of the situation with Russia, which again is why it's important to have redundancy, to have more than one option, to have more than two options if possible, because you never know what's going to happen. And JD, didn't the US decide we could accept no more RD-180s after a certain point? Well, I guess the real tipping point for that was 2014 when Russia annexed, aka took over the Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine. And that's when ULA took steps to stockpile as many RD-180s as possible. And I need to poke around and see if I can find more information about Northrop Grumman's supply of RD-181s, because I really have no idea if they have a usable stock of those, or if they are literally down to like 3 engines, as one person said recently. But Northrop Grumman is less forthcoming with these sorts of details than ULA is. They're quite open about this stuff. Tig says, got a lot of likes on your shirt and shared your site so they could get them. I want 10% for advertising. Sure thing, buddy. I appreciate it. JD says he's wearing his Earth Mars Yin Yang, super soft and great for working out. Yeah, I don't usually wear well, I do sometimes, but I don't usually wear the Yin Yang Planets shirt because I've got the big Yin Yang in the background, and I didn't want like everything to be Yin Yang. But yeah, I do love that shirt, and the kind I got, I don't remember whether it's the deluxe whatever, but whatever version of the shirt that I got is quite soft and very comfortable. All right, looks like we may be running out of questions. Okay, all right, so thank you all for coming. I appreciate you continuing to join me on Sundays, and stay safe, keep it raw, and I will catch you in the next live stream. Bye for now.